Welcome back to Outside Views, and today we have to talk about something that perfectly encapsulates the utter self-sabotage of the Brexit project. The frantic scramble to mitigate a self-inflicted wound before a hard deadline, all while political ideology insists on complicating the most sensible path forward. And the headline I'm looking at is Brussels stalls Brexit reset talks as carbon tax deadline looms. And honestly, the sheer predictability of this entire situation is exhausting. It's like watching a car crash in slow motion that everyone knew was coming. And yet, the people in the car still insist they are on the fastest route. And the urgency here is all about the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM. And this is the EU's new carbon border tax and is set to apply in its definitive regime from January 1st, meaning British firms exporting carbon-intensive goods like steel and cement to their biggest market are about to get hit with a brand new, costly and completely avoidable tariff. The EU is doing this to prevent carbon leakage, essentially stopping companies from moving production outside the bloc to places with laxer environmental rules, only to then export the dirty goods back into Europe. And it's a robust climate policy, and the only way for the UK to avoid it is to link its own emissions trading system, the ETS, with the EU's ETS. Linking the two systems would essentially recognize that the UK is pricing carbon at an equivalent level, granting British goods a mutual exemption from the CBAM. And this is not a political grandstanding point. It's a technical, logical, and entirely necessary step for the economic survival of sectors like steel and cement in the UK. But of course, in the tortured landscape of post-Brexit relations, nothing is simple or logical. We are now in late 2025, and officials in Brussels have stalled the very negotiations that would achieve this crucial linkage. Ambassadors from the EU's 27 member states failed to give the green light for the talks last Friday, pushing the issues back to last Tuesday. And the deadline to get a deal done, or at least a time-limited exemption, is the end of December. And frankly, as Adam Berman from Energy UK said, it's now not realistic that a negotiation of this complexity will be completed in time. And this delay isn't just bureaucratic foot dragging. It's an explicitly political, and the core of the political clash is money. One EU diplomat confirmed there is disagreement among member states over the issue of how much the UK should pay to participate in the single market benefits that this linkage would grant. And this is the ugly truth that Brexit proponents consistently denied. Access to the EU's integrated systems comes with obligations, including financial ones. And there is a specific wrangle over when the UK should pay, with the majority of member states suggesting it be tied to the next electricity trading agreement, while others hold out for a later or separate arrangement. And the EU is quite rightly establishing a precedent. If you want to integrate into a deep, sophisticated, and mutually beneficial system like the ETS, you must contribute financially to the policy mechanisms that underpin it, and you must accept certain rules. The Conservative Party spokesperson in the UK immediately jumped on this, calling the EU's demands an outrageous hit job on British taxpayers and an attempt to extort cash from them as a punishment. And this is the perpetual poisonous cycle of post-Brexit politics. A technical solution, which is a win-win for both climate ambition and trade, is immediately framed by one side as a punitive extortion and a threat to sovereignty. This demonstrates a fundamental inability to engage with the reality of international cooperation without resorting to nationalist victimhood. They sold the country a fantasy of retaining seamless access without paying a price or accepting shared rules. And now, when the bill arrives, they cry foul. The very phrase value to the UK and UK industry used by the government spokesperson rings hollow when their own industries are facing a crippling new tax because their political masters failed to prioritize this technical negotiation. And the irony is suffocating. The UK ETS is a smaller, less liquid and more volatile market than the vast EU ETS. Linking it would be a huge economic benefit to the UK, not just by avoiding the CBAM, but by creating a larger, more stable carbon price, which is essential for attracting investment into low-carbon technologies and achieving net zero goals more cost-efficiently. And government modeling even suggested that linking the two schemes could provide a small but crucial 0.1% boost to UK GDP in the long run. Remember this big praised trade agreement that a certain Boris Johnson signed and how much that brought to the GDP. Well, you should be celebrating about 0.1% here then. But no, the immediate political optics of paying the EU are deemed more important than the long-term economic and environmental health of the country. And this delay is a concrete and material setback. It means UK exporters of steel, cement, aluminum, fertilizers and hydrogen have to spend the next few weeks scrambling to prepare for a tax hit that could have been avoided if the reset talks agreed in principle back in May had actually been allowed to proceed. And the issue is not purely domestic for the UK. Adam Berman pointed out that this situation could also harm the EU itself. If UK importers are suddenly hit by CBAM, the EU might see emissions increase as it seeks to replace what are currently relatively cleaner UK imports, a clear example of how political friction actively undermines shared climate goals. And the lack of foresight in the entire Brexit planning process is magnified by the current situation with Northern Ireland as well. Besides all the CBAM discussions, there are already now fears that exporting countries could exploit the complex and contentious border agreements with Northern Ireland to try and bring carbon-intensive goods into the EU. And they might pay a lower or no carbon tax and route it through the bloc's soft border with the rest of the island of Ireland. And to prevent this, EU officials are already considering pushing to apply the CBAM on goods coming into Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK, a move that would be an incredibly thorny and politically explosive escalation of trade friction within the UK itself, all stemming from the failure to strike a simple linkage deal. The UK government at the time, in its haste to divorce from the EU, created an unworkable internal border scenario, and now the EU is forced to take measures to protect its single market integrity, which predictably land right back on the UK's doorstep as a fresh crisis. There was speculation of a time-limited exemption for the UK from CBAM while linkage negotiations were underway, but now with Brussels stalling, the hope is rapidly fading. And the big question is, as Berman put it, can both sides have an honest conversation about what the implications might be if there isn't an exemption from the beginning of next year? And the answer apparently is no, because the conversation is poisoned by the question of financial contribution. And meanwhile, other crucial reset talks are also lagging, tangled in the same web of political sensitivity. The UK wants a sanitary and phytosanitary deal for agri-food, which would see the UK align with EU standards to cut the massive red tape, checks and costs currently crippling food and plant trade across the Channel. The UK's EU Relations Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds wants this up and running by 2027. And this deal, which would remove mandatory export health certificates and routine border checks, is estimated to add up to £5.1 billion a year to the UK economy by making trade with its biggest market faster, easier and cheaper. But to meet that 2027 timeline, talks need to wrap up by some point in 2026 to allow time for the UK Parliament to enact the necessary dynamic alignment legislation. And the fact that this essential common sense negotiation is also being held up by the political sensitivity over the youth mobility talks, a highly contentious issue due to the UK's entrenched opposition to free movement, shows that the EU is using its leverage across the entire reset agenda. Of course they do. They have the market that the UK wants access to. It's not a club that opens the doors for everyone to walk in. And they are saying quite clearly that the UK cannot pick and choose the easy beneficial economic parts like ETS linkage and SPS alignment, while completely refusing to budge on the contentious political parts like youth mobility and financial contribution. Cooperation is a package deal, and the UK's insistence on a laissez-faire approach to everything it doesn't like is now creating a choke point on its own economy. And this is the inevitable result of a politically driven, emotionally charged separation that failed to account for the necessary compromises of geographical and economic reality. And the Conservative Party spokesperson, they are not in power, but still railing against demands from the EU for billions of pounds, conveniently ignores the fact that the UK is desperate to be in the room for the EU's £150 billion rearmament scheme, euros in that case, which it is racing to join by mid-November. And they want the benefits of access to EU funds and schemes, the security, the defense cooperation, the economic boost, but they are ideologically incapable of accepting the cost or the rules that must accompany it. They want access without accountability. They want benefit without burden. And this is a fundamentally childish approach for foreign relations. And now, British firms are paying the price with the carbon tax deadline rapidly approaching. The CBAM deadline, January 1st, is not some abstract policy date. It is a self-imposed economic guillotine placed on UK businesses by the political decision to leave the single market's regulatory fold without a robust, well-negotiated replacement strategy. And the delay in Brussels is not purely malicious, as the Brexiteers will once again say. It's a calculated political maneuver by the EU to remind London, yet again, that access has a price and cooperation is indivisible. And the UK government should have had its ETS linkage deal done months ago, before this became leverage for other more contentious issues. Their failure to do so, their failure to see this entirely predictable deadline coming, is yet another devastating consequence of their refusal to approach the EU as a sovereign partner rather than a political enemy to be constantly antagonized. And yes, I'm saying that about Labour as well because of their handling of the situation. And we will all be watching if common sense finally prevails or if political dogma wins out, leaving UK businesses to pay the price for the ideological purity of a project that promises so much and delivered so little but friction. It's an exhausting watch, but for the sake of those UK businesses, I desperately hope they find a way to plug this self-inflicted hole before the clock runs out. So thanks for joining me on Outside Views, and if you want to see another video right now, the next one is right here in the end screen.